Hello, everyone. Welcome to the ILN Talk Show, a free space to discuss different developments in Muslim-majority countries and beyond, in the hope of promoting a Muslim case for freedom. My name is Tasnim Idriss, and I am the Editorial Associate of the Islam Liberty Network, and this is actually our fourth episode. You can check our previous episodes in our YouTube channel. We covered different topics with different guests, like the topics of how Muslim organizations should manage their PR, religious freedom and Hagia Sophia, and post-Islamism in Muslim societies. Today we're going to be discussing a very interesting topic, which is the Tunisian economy 10 years after the Arab Spring. We're very happy to be joined by Dr.Aymen Boughanmi, who is an author, a university professor, and a researcher in political affairs and economic history. And most importantly, he is the Islam Liberty Network Tunisia Fellow. Dr. Aymen, we're very happy to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So all the discussions that are related to the Arab Spring might have gone down a little because it's March and, all the debates took place between December 17th and January 14th, the anniversary of the Tunisian Revolution. However, the economic issue has always been such a central issue throughout these 10 years. So before we start analyzing this topic in depth, I'd like to say that it's probably a truth nationally acknowledged that the Tunisian economy is in a very bad state. It is literally collapsing in every way, and this is what everybody keeps saying, and we're going to be debating this in a minute. However, there is a significant minority, I would say, that keeps saying that it's perfectly normal, it's perfectly normal to have a collapsing economy, after a revolution. It's not like that you start a revolution, you topple a dictator, and hey presto, you have a blossoming economy. It doesn't really work that way, and it's not that simple. This is what history teaches us, after all, and we should actually be grateful because things could have been worse, and we're actually better off than all of the other Arab Spring countries, both economically and politically. To what extent do you agree with this? Things could have also been better, right?
I think I entirely agree with the idea that revolutions are dangerous times. Mm-hmm. And we need not expect a situation of growth and development a few weeks or a few months and even a few years after a revolution. Mm-hmm. This is an intellectual take upon the question, but whether the people may understand that or may accept it or not, I am doubtful that such sophisticated analysis is convincing and or is useful for people who suffer on a daily basis and who want jobs, who want food, who want better conditions. And those people are desperate. They are all the more desperate that they were promised paradise. And their expectations were so high that these expectations cut off their relationship with their own reality, with the reality of their own past, the recent past of the dictatorship and the corruption we had to fight under the regime of Ben Ali. So people tend to forget that and to focus on the broken promises of the revolution.
Absolutely. So speaking of expectations, the Islam Liberty Network is actually working on a project entitled the Arab Spring 10th Anniversary Life and Opportunities of Wazis in Tunisia in partnership with the Atlas Network and Frederick Normann's Foundation for Freedom. We actually had to reschedule our conference because of the coronavirus, and you, Dr. Aymen, you were part of this conference. You were one of our speakers. So as part of this project, we actually held workshops in different cities in Tunisia, especially the inner cities, and we met with, street vendors themselves, municipality presidents, and regular people, citizens, and we discussed, the situation of street vendors, and we, made their voices heard. And they discussed, the suggestions they wanted to have to improve their situation and everything. We also interviewed street vendors across Tunisia. You can find all of the interviews in our Islam and Liberty Network YouTube channel. After all these things, we actually produced a paper. And based on all the discussions we had, the conclusion that we came up with is that everybody is literally pessimistic about everything that has happened. And, everybody's cursing the revolution itself and wish it had never happened. Many people told us that they felt betrayed by the promises of the revolution. And, for example, in your book, the 2012 book entitled Post-Revolution State, you raised the economic issue and these expectations after revolution. My question to you in 2021, how can democracy and freedom result in a collapsing economy? In the sense that, are we misusing democracy? Like, to what extent is political stability related to a possible thriving economy, and how can we explain this to the regular people, normal citizens?
A democracy can hardly be sustainable without a robust growing economy. To be honest, it is very dangerous to have the unstable kind of broken economy we have now. It is dangerous for our society, but it is mainly dangerous for our democracy because people will tend to think that democracy is anti-economy, anti-growth, anti-prosperity, which is absolutely not the case. But people tend to think in terms of stories, in terms of narratives, rather than in terms of figures, analysis, historical facts. Indeed, we made a huge and terrible mistake at the beginning of the revolution when we told people, and here the responsibility is entirely resting on the shoulders of the elites, the intellectual elites especially, and the political elites, who explained that the revolution is going to be a spring. The revolution is going to be about easy traveling from darkness to light, from decadence to prosperity, which is absolutely nonsensical in terms of historical fact checking. Now the situation is difficult, but we have to deal with it. Of course, I need to add that we were not very lucky. We were not very
lucky. In what sense?
First of all, our democratic friends, our potential allies in this, I mean, Europe, North America, and the other democratic countries, were not very helpful in terms of their economic support. Let me give you one example. In order to rebuild Europe, the United States was ready to invest up to 4 to 5% of its GDP in what was called the Marshall Plan. Such a thing was never done in Tunisia, let alone the other Arab countries which witnessed the so-called Arab Spring. Another factor that made the situation very hard for us was the instability of our neighbor, Libya, which went through a much worse situation with regard to its revolution, a situation that may be or that remains a possibility for our Tunisian experience. I don't want to sound very or too pessimistic, but I need to say that it is always possible for the Tunisian experience to go toward a very bad direction. Lastly, but there are many other factors. But the COVID experience, the COVID crisis, came to add further challenges to already difficult situation. Today, we need to be brave, we need to be rational, we need to undertake what reforms are necessary to save what can be saved in order to look forward positively to the future.
But the COVID situation is recent. It's been like a year maybe, but things have been really collapsing, since like 9 years if we wouldn't count the COVID year. So why everybody's saying that it's on COVID? Like they probably forgot that we've been like 9 years into the post-revolution Tunisia and nothing has really changed.
No, of course you're absolutely right in terms of our evaluation of the situation. But when you have a negative growth of 8% or even more, it is absolutely clear that the COVID crisis was a very bad news for our Tunisian experience. For example, one of our strategic sectors is tourism. Tourism was hit hard because of the revolution. This is to be expected because in a revolutionary context, no one is ready to take the risk of disturbing their holidays or their vacations to come in an unstable country.
Absolutely.
Then came terrorism, as you know, and that was even a worse situation than the revolution itself. And as soon as we started to pick up in terms of our expectations related to the tourist sector, the COVID came and gave us a very serious blow. So we are fragile and we receive serious blows that are very severe even for very, very strong and robust countries in Europe and in other parts of the world. So the situation is bad and we were not very lucky with regard to these issues.
Absolutely. So for all these reasons, now you can hear after 10 years of the Tunisian revolution, people are starting to say that things were really better off under Ben Ali's regime. They're wishing that the revolution had never happened. But at the same time, a lot of other people think otherwise. They think that things cannot be good under a dictatorship and that the economic growth percentages were literally fake, given by the Ben Ali administration, and that there was a lot of corruption happening and a lot of people were suffering in silence. But, it's just that it's now when journalists are free to report whatever they want and they're actually free to even come up with figures, things can be really exaggerated and we're blaming everything on the revolution. So they're saying that just like dictatorship is harmful, so is democracy and freedom if we misuse them. But anyway, we can't really choose dictatorship over democracy. So we just need to learn how to be responsible in a democracy. So, what is your response to these two different opinions?
Okay, being responsible under a democracy is not very easy. I'll come to that in a few seconds. But let me say a few words about those people who think that we can come back to a pre-revolutionary, supposedly glorious age. This is nonsense. This is nonsense for two reasons. If the revolution happened, it happened because it was a sign of failure. A revolution is always a sign of failure. A successful regime, a successful country does not go through revolutions. A successful regime would leave institutions to build upon and to continue the journey of progress.
So it's a failure in both an economic and political sense. So both of them.
Exactly. A failing regime or a failed regime is a regime that leaves a revolution. And people think that because the regime is ousted, things are going to be easy. But not at all. Because when you leave the institutions, you go to the street, you bring down the regime. You can never know to what extent you are going to destroy the institutions of the state.
Yeah.
In Tunisia, we've been lucky enough and we've been wise enough to kind of bring in together the moderate elements of the old regime with the moderate elements of the new political forces, post 2011 political forces, in order to build a consensus.
What do you mean by the moderate? You called them moderate, so to what extent they're moderate?
In the sense that they were not ready to take the risk of destroying the state, either by asking for an immediate revolutionary answer to their claims, or asking for a kind of a counter-revolutionary return to the pre 2011 revolution. I call them moderate in the sense that they were ready to deal with each other, to be unhappy with the outcome, and to accept it. This is a sign of moderation and a sign of wisdom, and we've been very successful in that sense. The problem was that parallel to this political achievement, the economy did not follow. The economy did not follow. I can explain why. There are many domestic reasons for that. For example, reform was impossible because of the weight that the trade unions have, their capacity to block any serious attempt. There are other reasons, the political instability, and the political instability is a shared responsibility between the majority, the minority, the civil society. So all these factors meant that the economy did not follow, and people started to think that their lives did not change, their situations did not improve, and their expectations were broken. Hence, the pessimism you were referring to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I wanted to add a few words about being responsible in a democracy.
Yeah.
This is key to our political and economic issues. The revolution allowed us to legitimize what is illegal, because the revolution is always an illegal action. That's the problem with the revolution. And when you accept something illegal as legitimate, you run the risk that other illegal or maybe bordering on illegality actions ask for legitimation as well. This is what has been going on with regard to wild strikes, to hunger strikes, to sittings. In Tunisia, people tend to act irresponsibly with regard to their daily economic activities. People don't work seriously. Politicians tend to take advantage of the liberties that are guaranteed by the democratic system in order to act irresponsibly, in order to say things that are not acceptable in a civilized, normal setting. This is a very serious difficulty, and there are many changes that are needed in order to overcome it.
Okay, so we covered, a major part of this controversial problem, but there is something that you did not raise, and frankly, I was waiting for you to raise it, but I'm going to raise it now. I really think that the most important reason why we're still behind, because the goals of the revolution are not still met. The reason behind this is that what we call the destructive role of what we usually refer to as the clash of ideologies in Tunisia. These ideologies are literally splitting us apart, stopping us from addressing the real challenges such as the economic situation. We're both Tunisians, and we should, explain to our viewers that in Tunisia nowadays, and they've been doing this throughout the 10 years and even before, politicians are all about ideology and not really about the real and effective economic social plans. You should know that the Tunisian society is a homogeneous society. We're like 99% Sunni Muslims, which should be considered as a great asset. But a lot of people think that, these clashing ideologies like Islamism and secularism, they're like as if they were a sectarian problem, a real sectarian problem. Now, in a democracy, it's really healthy to have ideological debates because the alternative would be totalitarianism, and it's really harmful. But what we're having in Tunisia is not really that healthy debate, but a real destructive one. If an Islamist or a leftist is capable of running an economy and he proves that he can do so, their respective opponents would be going after them just because they're like from a different ideological background. People are literally obsessed with ideologies in the purest clinical sense, I would say. So what do you think about this? I mean, luckily, Tunisia is not from a strategic area. It's not like a geopolitically strategic. Otherwise, it would have been a disaster because, superpowers would be really targeting it. But still, we're really suffering from this. So what do you think about this clash of ideologies as far as the economic situation is concerned?
I think that our ideological memories are very, very, very long and robust, and that our historical memories are very limited and almost inexistent. We have failed many times to learn from history and to learn from reality, and we tend to focus on our ideological obsessions, fighting each other on the fields that are already out of use.
Yeah.
I think one of our failures with regard to this issue is the fact that we want democracy, and most of us do not want liberalism. Most of us think of democracy in a kind of popular democracy mindset. We want a democracy that would provide us with everything, with jobs, with the security, with the money, with the subsidized consumer goods. We want all that, but we don't want to pay taxes. We don't want to behave responsibly with regard to our economic activities. So it is a kind of a lost dream. Those the revolutionary who thought of history in Marxist terms, who wanted a revolution in order to establish what they think to be paradise on earth.
Yeah.
When they were faced with Tunisian revolution, they found, or they discovered, that reality does not allow for such unbounded dreams, whether based on religious terms or based on communist ideologies or based on other dogmatic thinking.
Why wouldn't it allow it if we embrace each other and just accept that we're different ideologically speaking and just, work together as a team on the economic and political challenges? If only we just put our ideological creed, I would say, aside, we can function with some compromises here and there.
It is very difficult to renounce one's ideologies when the evolution is not gradual. In democratic countries, people kind of forgot their ideologies because democracy allowed them step by step into forgetting the most radical aspects of their ideologies. In Tunisia, and in a revolutionary context generally, that is very hard, because the story that people tells themselves when a regime fails is, the regime failed, now we are going to realize our ideological dream. And when they don't realize their ideological dream, they tend not to question the dream itself. They tended to accuse their rivals or their adversaries of being counter-revolutionary. So the debate becomes, rational debate becomes almost impossible. And as you know, the political scenery in Tunisia, the many accusations that all adversaries tend to offer to offer themselves.
Yeah, it's completely ridiculous. I mean, it's as if we're watching a movie without any end. So, what would your solution be as someone who's knowledgeable about these issues, and as if you can explain this to our viewers who are not necessarily from Tunisia? What do you suggest?
Your question seems very simple in terms of articulation, but in terms of answering it, I promise it is not as easy as anyone would expect. I think the first step...
Exactly, the first step. What we should be doing is the first step.
The first step, and the most important one, is for moderate people in different political parties and in different political families and ideologies, moderate people to continue working together.
Continue? Excuse me? They haven't been working together in the first place.
They built a consensus on in order to govern, but they failed to build a consensus in order to reform.
Sure, yeah.
And building a consensus in order to govern is not as easy as people tend to imagine. You need to trust the other, and trusting the other is not something very widespread these days in Tunisia. So now they needed, moderate people need to build a consensus, not just in order to govern, but also in order to introduce some reform. A moderate Islamist must not bet on another Islamist, or a radical Islamist, just because they belong to the same political family. A moderate Islamist must bet on moderate seculars, and vice versa. So for us to move forward and to start having reasonable discussions about our political system, about our electoral system, and about our economic reforms. I think these are the three main issues we need to discuss.
Absolutely. I mean, this is like ending on a good note. I hope they'll hear from you, all the politicians. Well, it's been really an enjoyable discussion, Dr. Aymen. I hope everybody has enjoyed it as much as I did. We covered almost everything that is related to the economic situation in Tunisia. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for all the insights you shared with us, and looking forward to having more interesting discussions with you in the future.
Many thanks to you.
Thank you. So thank you everyone for choosing to watch the ILN Talk Show, and stay tuned for our 5th episode. Goodbye.